Right. This week we are looking at Unit 8. So Unit 8 is not a long unit. We're going to get through all of it, this week. But there is a lot of terms and like concepts that you need to understand, so it can be a little difficult in that way. So let's start off by kind of looking at what you're going to need to do. So there's 6 videos for you to watch this week. Most of them are the short code.org videos. There's the Unit 8 lecture, that's the one that you're watching right now, and then as we go through the slides, I'll kind of point out these other 5 videos that you should watch. These will explain some of the concepts in more detail, so if you don't watch these videos, you're not going to get it all. If I tried to put all of this into one video, we'd be here forever. So make sure you watch the code.org videos. As far as your assignments, there's 4 of them, so again, you will be doing your Cornell notes. So you should have a copy of that open while you're watching this video so you can fill in these definitions, questions, and kind of your key takeaways. There is an activity guide. I'm going to go over this in a minute, so you'll be doing this for lessons 2 and 3. And then there is an MCQ practice that you're going to do. So when you click on this, it'll take you to the College Board where you're going to see some multiple choice questions. Just to kind of get you familiar with how the questions look on the AP exam and your assessment next week. And then lastly, there's the weekly check-in. So we're going to kind of get into this. All right, so we start by looking at lesson 2. This has to do with data policies and privacy. So there's some terms that I want you to know. The first one is personally identifiable information. We call this PII. This is information about an individual that identifies, links, relates, or describes them, right? So this can include obvious identifiers like a name and an address, as well as data, right? So your IP address, your location history, your biometric data. That is all considered personally identifiable information. This is information that we want to kind of protect the best we can, because there are people out there that want to get this information to either break into accounts that we may own, stalk us, just kind of malicious things that people want to do with this. There's the idea of a computing innovation. This one is, we don't go into a lot of detail on it, but you do really need to understand what it is, especially because your Unit 8 project is going to be based on you coming up with your own computing innovation. So basically any innovation that includes a computer or program code as an integral part of its functionality, that's what we consider a computing innovation. So it can be physical, like a self-driving car. It can be, non-physical, like software, like a photo editing app. It can also be conceptual, right? Like an e-commerce system. These are all considered computing innovation. So it's any like new product, new innovation that we come up with that includes the use of like a computer or program code. We call those computing innovations. There is this idea of data policy and privacy policies. So any website you go to legally is supposed to have a data policy and a privacy policy. This is basically a public statement by a company that explains what data is collected on their site, how it's used, who it's shared with, and what control users have over their information. So it's kind of important for us to read data policies and privacy policies on some of these websites so that we can understand how our personal identifiable information is being stored, shared, sold, and what control we have over it. After that, we have this idea of geolocation. Geolocation is just your geographic location. So it's data that identifies your physical location. It's usually collected through GPS, Wi-Fi, cell tower signals. All of those can be used to basically track your location, which is what our phones are doing all the time. And this gets us back to a Unit 2 concept called cookies. So in Unit 2, we talked about cookies as these small pieces of code that a website would return to our computer so that it could store our session information, so that every single time we request a new page within a secure site, we don't have to log in every single time, right? The cookie would store that information and then send that identifier with all of our future requests so the website knows we are who we say we are, right? So again, these cookies are just small pieces of data stored on a user's device. What you need to understand is that cookies not only store session data, but they can also track activity, track our preferences, track our login information. So they do contain personally identifiable information. So, there are people who will want to try to get onto our computers to obtain this data that these cookies have, right? And all of this kind of leads into the idea of a digital footprint. That's the trail of data left behind by a user when they use digital services. So everything you do on the internet creates this digital footprint that you leave. It's kind of there, kind of forever, right? So we want to kind of be aware that we are leaving this trail of data behind us as we use apps, use websites, use these computing innovations. And what this all kind of gets towards, kind of these key takeaways, is, computing informations, they rely heavily on collecting and using personally identifiable information. And, this is good. It creates these super convenient and personalized services for us, but it also creates this privacy risk because digital information, it's really difficult to control once it's shared. So for lesson 2 and really lesson 3, if you were in class with me, we would kind of look at this prompt and you would kind of read through these and decide like, hey, which items from this list do you consider to be private or personal, meaning you wouldn't want it shared with anyone, right? Knowing this is all personally identifiable information. This is all part of your digital footprint somewhere. It's out there. Depending on what site it has and what their data policies are and their privacy policies, you have limited control over how this is stored, sold, shared, all of it, right? So that just kind of gets, you guys thinking that like your birthday, your social security number, like your medical history, your racial ethnic identity, right? The video of you singing in a song, a recording of your voice, right? This is all out there somewhere. The question is who really owns it, who controls it, and what control do you have over that? So one of the videos you're going to be watching is this truth about privacy. It kind of gets towards these key takeaways that this personally identifiable information, that's information about an individual that identifies, links, relates, or describes them. Technology enables us to be able to like en masse collect, use, and exploit this information so that we can not only create computing innovations to help people, but it also gives, malicious actors this chance to try to obtain that information and use it against us. So it kind of leads us into lesson 3, which I'll go over. After lesson 3, I'm going to kind of talk about the worksheet that you're going to do, because that's going to use what you just did for lesson 2 along with lesson 3. So for lesson 3, we talk about innovation versus privacy trade-off. This is really the protection of data and systems against unauthorized access or attacks. We get into this idea of security. So any entity other than the primary user or service provider that collects, accesses, or processes data, we kind of refer to that as security. There's, this idea of facial recognition, right? We use this on our phones all the time. It's being used more and more. But that is basically any technology that analyzes facial features to identify or verify a person's identity. We talked about location data. That's that data that tracks where a device or individual is located over time. And then we get into this idea of intended effect and unintended effect. So intended effect is the result that the designers of a computing innovation planned or expected. So when they're creating these computing innovations, they think it's going to do something and it does it. That's an intended effect. The unintended effect, that's the result that was not planned or anticipated by the designers of the computing innovation. A really good example of this that people like to talk about is the like button on Facebook. So when that was first developed, the guy who came up with this thought that it was going to be this super great way for people to show that they appreciate and liked things that were being posted online. That was the intended effect. And for a lot of people, it does work that way. But there was an unintended effect to this in that some people started feeling down or sad or depressed or, not happy because something they posted wasn't getting enough likes. That was something they didn't plan on, right? But it did happen. So that's kind of the intended effect versus the unintended effect. And then lastly, we have the legal and ethical concerns. Again, we're talking about the value of privacy, this idea of data and privacy. So when we're thinking of legal and ethical concerns, those are issues related to fairness, harm, rights, and responsibilities that arise from the use of computing innovations. So kind of talking about this a little, you need to understand that most services appear free because companies collect and monetize user data through advertising, analytics, and data sharing. There's a saying that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. This idea that Google gives you Gmail and, Google Drive and Google Docs and Google Sheets, they give you all of this for free. The truth is they're really not giving it to you for free. They are giving it to you so that you can put your personally identifiable information in there. And then they have access to that data. And if we don't read these privacy policies and data policies, we don't understand really how that data is being treated, who it's being sold to, who it's being shared with, how much control do we as the person that created the data even have over how that data is sold and shared by this third-party company. So just kind of understand that even though services appear free, they're really collecting and monetizing that data through advertising, analytics, and data sharing. And it's something that you should really think about. For facial recognition, that can improve security and convenience, but it does raise concerns about constant surveillance, lack of consistency, or, not consistent, but lack of consent, misuse by governments or businesses. There's a lot of concern around facial recognition and the idea of surveillance and monitoring societies and tracking movement, which gets into that legal geolocation data. So facial recognition is kind of controversial, right? Even location data, it can really help us, right? It improves navigation, emergency response, safety, but continuous tracking can reveal sensitive information about a person's habits, routines, and associations. So you kind of want to be aware of that. When we're talking about intended and unintended, effects of these computing innovations, just remember an intended effect is the design purpose of the innovation, such as making shopping more convenient. An unintended effect may be increased surveillance or unfair impacts on certain groups. And this all, again, kind of leads to that ethical and legal concerns where computing innovations can affect large populations. Designers, they need to really think about, the fairness, the bias, the societal impact that they might have when developing these new technologies. 15 years ago, we just thought something was going to be cool, so we put it out there, and we didn't realize that all these unintended effects were happening. As we're developing software now that's getting more and more into this personally identifiable information, they are starting to think more about what could be an unintended effect of this, right? So just kind of your takeaway from lesson 3 is that computing innovations create powerful benefits, but also raise a lot of privacy, security, and ethical concerns. So you should be able to evaluate both intended and unintended effects on individuals and society when it comes to these computing innovations. When you're looking at lesson 3, there's going to be this video that you're going to watch. There's going to be a second video that talks about warrants and how people have to go to courts to get those warrants. There's kind of these key takeaways. I'm not going to read all this to you, but you can kind of pause the video and watch this, kind of read through this part. Again, it's nothing that I haven't said before, but make sure that you understand these. So when we're thinking about what you got to do this week, I mentioned the activity guide for lessons 2 and 3. So you will open this up, make a copy of it. Basically what you're going to do when you watch this video, The Truth About Privacy Policies, they are going to talk about how to go to a website and view the data and privacy policies for that website. So for this worksheet, what you're going to do is you're going to choose a website. It can be any website you want. You just need to tell me what website you went to. So you can go to CNN.com, ESPN.com, Instagram, wherever you want to go. You need to find the data policy, and then you are going to answer these questions about the data policy. So in that video, they will give you tips on how to look through it, because these things are long, they're written in legalese, they're hard to get through, so make sure you watch the video so you kind of know where to go. But I want you to answer, these questions. What kind of data is collected? How is the data you listed being used? What features are enabled by the data? Does the company share the data with anyone else? And if so, who? And question 4, can you access your own data? Can you modify, delete, whatever you want to do with that data? This will be explained in the data privacy policy. After that, you are going to answer question 5. This one you should have a couple sentences. So do you believe the benefits of the innovation you researched outweigh the privacy concerns? And you need to explain why or why not. So you should be using access here. Make an assertion. Give me a couple examples. Explain it in a few sentences and then conclude it up. I want to know that you actually have a thought about this and can articulate it and explain it and support it and justify it. All right, and then you'll answer question 6, which of the above categories best describes your overall comfort with using data to drive innovation or ensure security? There's kind of a little rubric. This is kind of what I'll look at when I'm grading through these. So just make sure you finish that worksheet. That's for lessons 2 and 3. All right, that will get us to lesson 5. So in lesson 5, we start talking about security risk. So this really kind of starts getting into different, ways that people try to get to our data. So we have this idea of phishing, not F-I-S-H, but P-H-I-S-H-I-N-G, phishing. Phishing is a technique that attempts to trick a user into providing personal information, often through fake emails or websites. So like everyone's gotten the email saying, hey, I had an uncle that just passed away. He gave me a bunch of money. I need to get it to the US. Click this link so I can transfer it to your account and I'll let you keep 10%, right? Like these are emails that used to go around. You still see them sometimes. Those are phishing emails. So they're just sending you something hoping that you're going to click a link or give them some information that is personal to you, that helps identify you so they can try to get access to your accounts. Another term is key logging. So this is actually software that records every keystroke made by a user to steal passwords or confidential information. So sometimes people will try to sneak this software onto your computer. It can be done by clicking a link in an email that you weren't supposed to click, putting a flash drive into your computer that you shouldn't have put in, just going to a website. Sometimes you'll inadvertently allow them to install something on your computer. Like we need to be aware and careful of this stuff because it's out there. So again, key logging, that's basically software. It tracks every key that you press. So people will go through, analyze that, tie it to cookie data, see when did you enter this website, try to find the keystrokes that you typed to get in so that they can get your passwords and stuff like that. There's malware. So this is software intended to damage a computing system or gain unauthorized control over its operations. And then there's, malware is basically viruses, right? There's also this thing called a rogue access point. So this is a wireless access point that provides unauthorized access to a secure network. So we have access points. They're kind of like routers in a way, but they're different. So again, you want to, kind of be aware of this stuff. All right. So even though these things like phishing, keylogging, malware, they sound like they should be pretty obvious, they're really not. Phishing is effective because it relies on this idea of social engineering, which is basically where we use social interactions that are normal to us in a malicious way to trick users into voluntarily giving away sensitive information. Malware, it can spread through infected downloads, email attachments, compromised websites, unsecured networks. It's super easy for malware to spread. Rogue access points, those are dangerous. They can intercept sensitive information transmitted over a network without the user's knowledge. So you could have someone just like sitting in a coffee shop with a rogue access point, waiting for you to, turn your computer on, connect to that Starbucks network, and now they're watching your data go through. And if that data is not encrypted, it's not being protected, it can get access to your sensitive information, and you would have no idea, right? So most of these cybersecurity threats, they specifically target personally identifiable information, again, because that can be used for identity theft, fraud, unauthorized access to accounts. You just kind of need to know that cybersecurity risks often exploit human behavior and vulnerabilities in networks. All right, so protecting your personally identifiable information requires awareness and kind of this knowledge of common attack methods like phishing, keylogging, malware, viruses, rogue access point. That all kind of helps you. So looking at lesson 6, there's going to be this video for you to watch. Talks about cybersecurity and crime. It's going to go into this idea of cybercrime, which is criminal activity carried out using computers or networks. It gets into data breach, which is an incident in which sensitive or confidential data is accessed without authorization. So we're having more and more data breaches as things get more and more digitized, kind of know what that is. And again, this term social engineering, which is just manipulating people into revealing confidential information. The most common form of hacking is not breaking into a secure system. The most common form of hacking is social engineering. It's this idea that, maybe I want to get into a building and I need an access card, but like there's people who will dress up like UPS drivers and walk behind an actual employee. They'll be carrying some boxes so that when that employee clicks their card on the door and the door gets open, this person standing behind them, will say like, hey, can you hold that door for me? The person looks and sees the UPS driver, not realizing that it's just someone who wants to get into the building, and then off they go, right? It's kind of a dramatic example, but it does happen. If I wanted to, I could put a key logging software on a flash drive. I can almost guarantee you if I throw it into the hallway, the student will pick it up and a student will put it into the computer to see what's on it. They would have absolutely no idea that I just installed a keylogger on their system and now I'm watching everything they do. That is social engineering. It's just taking advantage of people's kindness or habits to try to trick them into giving you personal information that they don't even intend to give you, but they're giving you. So again, awareness is super important, right? This idea of data breaches, because digital systems store data for like millions of users, a single breach can expose just a huge amount of personally identifiable information. A couple years ago, T-Mobile was hacked and a couple million users' names, addresses, socials were all, released from that data breach. So they're a big deal. Also kind of understand that like cybersecurity, this idea of protecting devices and networks and personal identifiable information, it's a moving target. So as security improves, attackers develop new methods requiring constant updates and vigilance, right? We're always having to look at this. We're always having to adjust what we're doing because the people trying to break in are adjusting what they're doing. So just kind of understand cybersecurity requires ongoing protection because threats evolve over time. That's kind of what this whole lesson's getting at. So from there, when we're specifically looking at lesson 8, we're talking about now that we know about data privacy and privacy policies and all that stuff, and we've talked about, security, like what risks are out there and kind of how we protect against them. We kind of move into like how we protect the data. So for this one, there's this idea of encryption. Encryption is the process of encoding messages so only authorized parties can read them. With encryption comes decryption, the process of reversing encryption to return a message to plain text. So typically we want to encrypt something, send it, and then when the authorized person receives it, it will be decrypted so they can see the message. When we're doing encryption and decryption, there's different methods that we can do. One of them is what we call a cipher, C-I-P-H-E-R. This is kind of just a general technique or algorithm used to perform encryption. There's different types of ciphers, so one of them is a Caesar cipher. This is an encryption technique that shifts letters in the alphabet by a fixed number. So again, these are terms that you're going to need to know for the AP exam and the multiple choice test. So when we're talking about cracking encryption, this is any attempt to decode a message without knowing the encryption key or algorithm. So we're trying to break that cipher, figure out how that cipher works so that we can maliciously decrypt the message so that we can read it even though we are not the intended audience. With this comes symmetric key encryption. This is an encryption method that uses the same key for both encryption and decryption. And then conversely, there is the public key encryption, which is an encryption method that uses a public key for encryption and a private key for decryption. We'll talk about this a little bit more in a second. Just know encryption is important because it protects sensitive information like passwords, payment data, while it's being transmitted over the internet. There are limits to this, especially symmetric key encryption, this idea that we're going to have one key to encrypt and decrypt, because both parties must securely share the same key, which is difficult to do without exposing it. It's hard for me to encrypt with a key and then get you securely not only the key but the message to decrypt it. That's hard to do. It's better if we have public key encryption where I'm using a public key to encrypt the message, but it takes a private key to decrypt it. That one works a little better because that public key is shared openly while the private key remains secret. So that kind of reduces the risk of encryption. But in general, encryption is a foundational cybersecurity tool that protects data both in transmission and storage. So again, here are these kind of encryption terms that you need to know, so make sure you got these. Make sure you watch this video about encryption and public keys, and then again, here's those terms that I just went over with you. So looking at lesson 9, what we have is a couple different authentication methods. So there is something called single-factor authentication. This is a security method requiring one form of verification. Typically, it's what we refer to as something you know. So when you go to a website and it asks for a username and a password, you click login and then you're logged in. That is single-factor authentication, and it just asks you something you know, which is your password. Beyond that, there is two-factor authentication. So this, it's a security method requiring two different types of verification. Usually it's going to be something you know and something you have. We see this a lot nowadays, and the something you know is a password, the something you have is a phone. So if you go to a website and it asks you for a password, and once you put that password in, it says, okay, now give me the code I just sent to your phone. So then you got to look at your phone, it gives you a 6-digit code, you type that in, and now you're allowed to go in, right? That is two-factor authentication because you had to prove yourself twice from these different categories, something you know and something you possess. This leads into multi-factor authentication. So in this one, we add a third category, and we're going to ask two questions. These questions have to come from different categories, right? So in multi-factor authentication, we could ask them something they know, like a password. We could ask them to prove that they possess something, like a phone. Or there's this third category, something you are, which could be your fingerprint, your facial scan. So this multi-factor authentication requires at least two of the following categories to be used. So you either have to use something you know, something you possess, or something you are. So typically students will confuse two-factor with multi-factor. Really the difference is two-factor, we're going to ask you something you know and something you possess. In multi-factor, I'm going to ask you two questions. Each question has to come from a different category. So I could do something you know and something you are. I could do something you possess and something you are. I'm just choosing two from different categories of the three options. So something you know could be, your mother's maiden name, your password, the street address you live on. Those are all something you know. Something you possess could be your phone, could be a computer, it could be like a key fob. Like I used to work for a company and I had to log into their bank account sometimes, so I literally had a key fob that would update every 60 seconds with a new code. So that key fob was something that I possessed. So when I went to log in, it would ask me for my password, and then something I possessed would be the code from that key fob, which updated every 60 seconds. So it's not just a phone or a computer, it could be something else. And then something you are, that's face scan, fingerprint scan, even smell. That's honestly becoming a new verification method for like high security government buildings and stuff like that. You will literally go into a room where the doors close and then it analyzes the air to see if you are who you say you are. Sounds silly, but it is an authentication method under something you are. So there is one more term on there. It's the computer virus scanning software. So this is just software designed to detect and prevent malicious software infections, right? This is Norton Antivirus, McAfee, all of those things. So again, multi-factor authentication is more secure than a password alone, mainly because it requires multiple independent forms of verification, making it harder for attackers to gain access even if one factor is compromised. Make sure you know that the 3 categories for authentication on the AP exam, it's something you know, something you have, and something you are. And then this should be common knowledge, but just know that when a software update comes out, you should install it, right? They are updating the software for a reason. Usually it's because they realize that there's a vulnerability. So once they put that patch out, you need to update your software to get that patch so that vulnerability is no longer in your system. Just the fact that they release the patch, when they do that, they have to also produce a document that says what they're fixing. So just the fact of them putting the patch out there with that document tells any malicious actor exactly what the fault was. So if you don't do the update, there is now a document that tells these hackers exactly how to get into your system. So you need to do your updates right away. And just kind of know that like strong authentication practices and updating security software, it's essential defense against these evolving cybersecurity attacks. And that pretty much does it for this unit. Right, so again, it's a lot of terms. Make sure you go through these slides, make sure you know the terms, make sure you got your Cornell notes filled out, and make sure that you know these terms. Right, your multiple choice test next week, I'm going to talk about it more in next week's video, but it's going to look a little different in the way the questions are formatted. But it's still 15 questions, and I would say, I think a third of the questions are just going to be terms and definitions. So you need to make sure that you know all of these terms and definitions so that you can answer those questions on the multiple choice test. And this does play into about 6 to 8% of your AP exam. So again, Unit 8 is a short unit, but there's a lot of terms, a lot of concepts. You got to know them. So if you have any questions, you can ask me at the weekly check-in. Otherwise, I will see you next week.